The sound of the slap cracked through the kitchen like a gunshot, and for 3 full seconds, nobody breathed. Taeyang's head had snapped sideways, his hand frozen halfway to his reddening cheek, his eyes wide with a disbelief that curdled fast into rage. Adiz stood over him, chest heaving, her hand still stinging, blood on her lower lip where his elbow had caught her seconds before. Behind her, 12 members of kitchen staff stood pressed against the steel counters, afraid to move, afraid to even look away. And in the doorway, silent as a held breath, stood Minjun. He did not shout. He did not reach for a weapon. He simply watched, his dark eyes moving from Taeyang's reddened face to Adiz's trembling hands. And in that silence, everyone in the room understood that something far worse than punishment was coming. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 8 months earlier, Adiz Nwosu had not set foot in a restaurant kitchen since university, and even then, only to eat. She was a forensic accountant, trained to read numbers the way other people read faces, to find the lie hiding inside a balance sheet. The people who recruited her called themselves an anti-corruption collective, a quiet network of investigators who chased dirty money across continents and handed it to journalists, to prosecutors, to anyone who could make the guilty pay. They told her that Minjun's restaurant in Seoul was a laundering front for a syndicate responsible for the militia raid that burned her family's compound in Lagos to the ground 3 years earlier, killing her uncle and scattering what remained of her family across 2 continents. They told her that if she got close enough, cooked well enough, disappeared into the role completely enough, she could find the ledger that would bring the whole operation down. She trained for 4 months before they sent her in. Knife skills, plating, the rhythm of a professional kitchen under pressure. She learned it all with the same discipline she'd once used to memorize tax codes and shell company structures. When she walked into Minjun's restaurant for her interview, she did not look like a woman playing a role. She looked like a chef who had spent her whole life chasing flavor, and that was exactly the point. "You have no professional kitchen experience," the head of staff had told her, flipping through a resume built entirely of fiction. "Why should we hire you?" "Because everyone in this city can follow a recipe," Adiz had said. "I can tell you why a dish is missing something a customer can't name. That's not something you put on paper." She got the job on trial. Within 6 weeks, she'd earned sous chef. Within 4 months, she was running the pass, and the head chef before her had quietly resigned, unable to keep up with the standards she set without ever seeming to try. Minjun noticed. Minjun noticed everything in his restaurant, because his restaurant was never just a restaurant. It was Taeyang who made that clear to her first, and often. He was the son of a man who had served Minjun's father for 20 years. A boy who had grown up believing the kitchen owed him deference he hadn't earned. From her first week, his comments came sideways, disguised as jokes that weren't jokes at all. "Careful," he told her once, watching her plate a dish with more care than he thought necessary. "In Ghana, do they even have restaurants like this, or is this the first real kitchen you've seen?" "I'm Nigerian," she said without looking up. "And I've eaten in better kitchens than this one." The staff around her laughed, quietly, the kind of laugh that made Taeyang's ears go red. He didn't forget it. Over the following months, the comments sharpened. He mocked her accent in front of new hires. He left her station a mess on purpose, then complained loudly when she cleaned it during service instead of before. He called her the help once, in front of a supplier, and smiled when she said nothing back. She said nothing back because she couldn't afford to. Every week, hidden inside the delivery order she filed, she smuggled scanned pages from the restaurant's second set of books to a contact who passed them up the chain to her handler, a woman who went by the name Surwa and who Adiz had never met in person, only through encrypted calls in the dead of night. Surwa told her which numbers mattered, which accounts to track, which shipments correlated with which unmarked wire transfers. Adiz memorized routes through the syndicate's finances the way she once memorized recipes, turning grief into method, method into patience. But patience wears thin under enough pressure, and by the 8th month, Taeyang had started watching her too closely for comfort. He lingered near her locker. He asked questions about her phone, her contacts, why she disappeared into the walk-in freezer for unusually long stretches during quiet service. She told herself it was paranoia born of racism and nothing more. She was wrong. The night of the slap began like any other, service running hot, orders stacking up, the whole kitchen moving like a single organism under her direction. Min-jun had come down from his office earlier than usual, standing near the past the way he sometimes did, saying little, watching everything. Adiz had learned not to let his presence rattle her. She'd learned to read him the way she read spreadsheets, quiet, precise, giving away nothing unless you knew exactly where to look. Near the end of service, Taeyang found her alone in the dry storage pantry, restocking spices, her guard down for the first time all night. "You think I haven't noticed?" he said, blocking the doorway before she could pass. "The way you disappear. The photos on your phone that aren't food. You've been copying something, haven't you?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Adiz said, keeping her voice level even as her heart slammed against her ribs. "Hand it over," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping into something uglier than his usual mockery. "Whatever you've been taking pictures of. Give it to me now, or I go straight to Boss Min-jun and tell him exactly what I think you really are. Get out of my way. Make me." He grabbed her wrist, and something in Adiz, 2 years of grief, of swallowed insults, of watching her family's compound burn in memory every single night, broke loose all at once. She wrenched free, and when he lunged to grab her again, his elbow caught her mouth. She tasted blood, and before she could stop herself, before training or discipline or fear of exposure could catch up to her body, her hand was already moving. The slap echoed through the pantry and out into the kitchen beyond, loud enough that every knife stopped moving, every voice went silent. And when Adiz turned, chest heaving, hand still stinging, she found Min-jun standing in the doorway, having seen the whole thing unfold. Nobody in that kitchen had ever seen Min-jun angry. He didn't raise his voice when men crossed him. He didn't threaten. He simply removed people from his life with a quiet, permanent finality that made grown men beg. So when he stepped into the pantry, his face unreadable, every person in that kitchen, Adiz included, braced for something final. "Everyone," Min-jun said, his voice carrying without effort. "Out of my kitchen! Now!" Taeyang straightened, smirking through the sting still blooming across his cheek, certain the words weren't meant for him. "Boss, she attacked me. I was only—" "I said everyone?" Min-jun's eyes moved to him, and whatever Taeyang saw there wiped the smirk off his face completely. Your father served my father for 20 years, and I will not forget that. But you will leave this kitchen tonight, and you will not come back." Gasps rippled through the staff. One of the older cooks, a man who'd worked the line since before Min-jun took over the family business, stepped forward. "Boss, with respect, you're punishing all of us for what one man did?" "I'm punishing all of you," Min-jun said, "because no one in this room stepped in to stop it, and no one in this room has told me the truth about what's been happening in my kitchen for months. I don't reward silence. Pack your things. All of you." The staff filed out in stunned disbelief, whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Adiz stood frozen at the center of it, blood still on her lip, waiting for her turn, certain that whatever mercy had spared the others would not extend to her. Min-jun turned to her last. For a long moment, he said nothing at all, and the silence stretched so long that Adiz's pulse roared in her ears. "Clean yourself up," he finally said. "You start earlier tomorrow. You're the only one I trust to run this kitchen now." She didn't understand it that night, and neither did the rest of his organization. Word of the banishment spread through the syndicate within hours, and by morning, the elders, men who had advised his father and now grudgingly advised him, were furious. They gathered in his office, a wall of gray suits and older, harder faces, demanding explanations he refused to give. "You gutted your own kitchen staff," one elder said. "For an outsider. A woman who has been here less than a year." "I gutted my kitchen staff," Min-jun said, "because I don't trust anyone in that room, and I haven't for months. This gave me a reason to clear it without telling my enemies I was looking. The elder's eyes narrowed. You think there's a leak? I know there's a leak, Minjun said. I've known for months. Tonight gave me the excuse to act on it without anyone realizing that's what I was doing. What Minjun did not say, not to the elders and not yet to Adiz, was that he had known exactly who she was since her third week in his kitchen. His father had taught him to read people the way she read numbers, patiently, carefully, without ever revealing what he'd already seen. He'd had her investigated the moment her forensic instincts started showing through her chef's disguise, the too precise questions about supplier invoices, the late nights near the office long after her shift ended. He knew she wasn't who she claimed to be. What he hadn't expected was that the trail she was quietly following, month after month, kept crossing the exact same names he'd been hunting himself. The names of the men inside his own organization who were bleeding money to someone outside it. He let her stay because she was, without knowing it, doing half his investigation for him. The days after the banishment were strange and tense. Adiz ran a skeleton kitchen with 3 newly hired cooks, none of them trained to the standards she was used to, and every meal service felt like walking a tightrope. Minjun came down more often now, not to oversee the food, but to watch her, to talk to her in ways he never had before. You didn't have to slap him, he said one night, after service, the kitchen empty and quiet around them. You could have called for help. Why didn't you? Because in my experience, Adiz said carefully, the people who are supposed to help never do. You learn to handle things yourself. That sounds like a lesson learned somewhere specific. Everyone's lessons come from somewhere specific. He studied her for a long moment, the way he studied ledgers, looking for the number that didn't add up. You're not from Ghana, he said finally. You said it yourself, that first week. Nigerian. Lagos, if I had to guess, from the way you season your jollof. Her hands stilled on the counter. Is that a compliment or an accusation? Both, maybe. He almost smiled. I know most things that happen in my restaurant, Adiz. I've known for a while. The words landed like a blade between her ribs, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Known what, exactly? That you're not just a chef, he said quietly. That you've been copying pages out of the second set of books in the office since your 4th month here. That you disappear into the walk-in with your phone more than any cook needs to. I've known since week 3, Adiz. I let you stay anyway. Why? The word came out smaller than she wanted it to, cracked at the edges. If you knew, why not just have me removed? Or worse? Because whoever you're working for, Minjun said, is chasing the same men I am. You've been finding threads in my own organization that I couldn't find myself, because you had access I don't. The kitchen staff talked to the new chef in ways they never talked to me. Every account you flagged, every shipment you tracked, I checked them against my own suspicions. They matched. You've been doing half my investigation without knowing it, and I let you keep going because it was useful to me. Adiz felt something in her chest crack open, grief and fury and disbelief tangled together so tightly she couldn't separate them. 2 years of careful, patient infiltration, and the man she'd been investigating had known the entire time, had let her run loose in his organization like a piece on a board he was quietly moving. You used me, she said. The same way you've been using me, he said without apology. We're not so different, you and I. If you're still watching up to now, type I'm enjoying it in the comments section. The confession didn't end things between them, it changed them. Adiz spent the following days in a fog, replaying every conversation, every small kindness Minjun had shown her, wondering how much of it had been genuine and how much calculation. She couldn't tell her handler what had happened. Admitting her cover was blown would end the operation immediately, and worse, would mean 2 years of grief and patience amounted to nothing. So she kept working, kept smiling for the syndicate's suspicious eyes, kept sending her nightly reports to Surwa as though nothing had changed, even as everything had. It was during one of those late-night calls, going over a shipment manifest that didn't match its declared cargo, that Adiz noticed something that made her blood run cold. The dates on Surwa's requested documents didn't line up with the militia raid timeline she'd been told about for 2 years. The fire that killed her uncle, the reason she'd agreed to this mission in the first place. She pulled the old case files Surwa had originally given her, cross-referenced them against banking records she'd since copied from Minjun's second ledger, and found a discrepancy that made no sense unless the story she'd been told from the beginning was a lie. The militia that burned her family's compound hadn't been funded by Minjun's organization at all. The money trail led somewhere else entirely, to accounts controlled by the very network that had recruited her, the people she trusted for 2 years, the people who called themselves an anti-corruption collective. She sat in her small apartment above the restaurant, staring at numbers that rearranged everything she thought she knew, and felt the floor drop out from under her. She had spent 2 years hunting the wrong man. Worse, she had been the weapon of the people actually responsible for her family's grief, used to gather intelligence that would let them seize Minjun's empire under the cover of justice she believed in with her whole heart. She confronted Surwa the next night, voice shaking with a fury she could barely control. "The shipment records don't match your case file. The militia wasn't funded by Minjun's syndicate. Explain that to me." There was a pause on the line, longer than Adiz liked, and when Surwa spoke again, her voice had lost its usual warmth. "You've done good work, Adiz. We need the ledger within 48 hours. Once we have it, this is over, and you can come home." "You didn't answer my question." "The ledger, Adiz." 48 hours. The line went dead, and Adiz sat alone in the dark, understanding with sick clarity that she had never been chasing justice. She had been a tool, recruited by a rival syndicate wearing the mask of righteousness, sent to steal evidence that would let them dismantle Minjun's organization from the inside and claim it for themselves. Everything she believed about her mission, about her uncle's death, about the 2 years she'd sacrificed, all of it had been built on a lie engineered by people who understood exactly which wound to press to make her useful. Unbeknownst to both Adiz and Minjun, a second betrayal was already unfolding beneath their feet. Minjun's most trusted bodyguard, a man named Sang-hoon who had served the family since Minjun was a teenager, had been quietly feeding information to the rival syndicate for over a year, resentful ever since Minjun passed him over for a leadership position he believed he deserved. It was Sang-hoon who had first tipped off Surwa's network to Minjun's laundering routes. It was Sang-hoon who had grown uneasy watching Minjun grow closer to Adiz, worried the chef's digging might expose his own tracks before he was ready. And it was Sang-hoon who, that very week, had warned the rival syndicate that time was running out, that Minjun's suspicions about a leak were growing too sharp, too close. Adiz had 48 hours to decide what kind of person she wanted to be. She could complete the mission as ordered, hand over the ledger, and let a rival syndicate seize an empire under a banner of justice she now knew was hollow. Or she could burn 2 years of her life, her grief, her entire reason for coming to Seoul in the first place, and choose a different kind of truth. She found Minjun in his office late that night, the restaurant closed, the kitchen dark below them. He looked up from his desk, and something in her face must have told him everything, because he set down his pen and waited. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you decide what to do with me." "Go ahead." She told him everything, the recruitment, the 2 years, the militia raid that killed her uncle, the ledger she'd been stealing piece by piece, and finally, the discovery that had unmade her entire mission from the inside out. Minjun listened without interrupting, his face unreadable in the low light, and when she finished, the silence between them stretched so long she thought she might scream just to break it. "You came here to destroy me," he finally said. "For a crime I didn't commit." "Yes." "And now the people who sent you are coming to finish what you couldn't." "Yes." 48 hours. Less now. She met his eyes, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm telling you because I'm done being used by anyone. I don't know what that means for me, whether you'll let me walk out of here or not. But I needed you to hear it from me before it happens." Minjun was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had none of the coldness she'd braced for. "You could have run," he said. "Taken what you already stole and disappeared before their deadline. Why come to me?" "Because you didn't hand me over when you found out who I really was," Adiz said. "You could have. You had every reason to. Instead, you let me stay, because it serves something bigger than either of our pride. I'm asking you to trust me one more time, for the same reason. The 48 hours ran out faster than either of them expected. Adiz had barely finished briefing Minjun on Surwa's likely extraction points when the first sign of trouble came, the restaurant's outer cameras cutting to static, one by one, a clean, professional blackout that meant only one thing. Minjun's remaining security moved into position without needing to be told twice, and Adiz found herself standing beside him at the center of the dining room, the ledger, the real one this time, the one she'd finally located that morning in a hidden panel beneath the office floor, clutched tight in her hands. They're here for that, Minjun said quietly, nodding at the ledger. Are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything, Adiz said, and struck a match. The extraction team breached the front entrance seconds later, 6 of them, faces covered, weapons drawn, moving with the practiced coordination of people who expected no resistance. What they found instead was Adiz standing in the center of the dining room, the ledger already curling into ash on a silver serving tray, flames licking upward as 2 years of evidence, and their entire justification for seizing Minjun's empire, turned to smoke in front of them. You stupid girl! Surwa's voice came from the doorway, no longer warm, no longer disguised as anything but what it was. Do you have any idea what you just did? I know exactly what I did, Adiz said. I stopped being your weapon. Gunfire erupted almost immediately, chairs and tables overturned for cover, the elegant dining room transformed into a battlefield in seconds. Minjun's remaining loyal men fought back hard, but they were outnumbered, and for a long, terrible stretch it looked like the extraction team would overrun the room by sheer force. In the chaos, Adiz caught sight of Sang-hoon near the kitchen doors, and understood in a single, horrible instant why he was hesitating to fire on the intruders, why his gun kept drifting toward his own side instead of theirs. He's the leak! She shouted at Minjun, over the chaos, pointing. It's him. It's been him the whole time. Minjun's eyes found Sang-hoon across the room, and something in his face broke, not surprise exactly, but the particular grief of a suspicion finally confirmed. Sang-hoon froze, weapon still raised, torn between 2 loyalties that had finally collided in the open. Before Minjun could act, Surwa moved fast, closing the distance to Adiz through the smoke and chaos, wrenching her arm behind her back and pressing a gun to her temple before anyone could stop it. Drop your weapons, Surwa shouted, or she dies right here. The room went still, gunfire tapering into a tense, ringing silence. Minjun stood frozen, weapon still raised, his eyes locked on Adiz's face, on the gun pressed against her skull, on the blood already trickling from a shallow cut at her hairline where she'd been struck. Every instinct in him screamed to fire, and every calculation told him he couldn't risk the shot. You have 30 seconds, Surwa said, to decide what she's worth to you. The 3 most intense words of the whole standoff hung in the air like smoke: a syndicate boss, a woman who had come to destroy him, and a gun that would decide which truth survived the night. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is far from over. Smash that like button, drop a comment on what you think happens next, and stay with us, because the ending is coming. Minjun's eyes moved once, briefly, to Sang-hoon, who was still standing frozen near the kitchen doors, weapon trembling in his grip, caught between the man he betrayed and the woman whose death would finally prove his guilt beyond any doubt. In that half-second, Minjun understood exactly what he had to do, and exactly what it would cost him. Sang-hoon, he said, his voice cutting clean through the tension. You've served my family for 15 years. You watched me grow up. And you sold every one of those years to the people holding a gun to that woman's head. Boss, Don't, Minjun said. Not now. Prove to me you have one loyalty left worth keeping. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Sang-hoon turned, weapon raised, and fired, not at Minjun, not at Adiz, but at Surwa's shoulder, the shot catching her off guard, her grip loosening just enough. Adiz twisted free, dropping low as Minjun's own shot rang out a half-second later, catching Surwa in the chest before she could recover her aim. She collapsed against an overturned table, and the extraction team, leaderless and suddenly exposed, broke formation, scrambling for the exits under the return fire of Min-jun's remaining men. In the ringing aftermath, Min-jun crossed the wrecked dining room in 3 long strides and pulled Adiz up from the floor, checking the cut at her hairline with hands that weren't entirely steady. Behind them, Sang-hoon stood alone amid the wreckage, weapon lowered, waiting for the judgment he knew was coming. "You saved her," Min-jun said quietly. "After everything. I betrayed you for money and pride," Sang-hoon said. "Not because I ever stopped believing in this family. I couldn't watch you lose the both of you tonight." Min-jun studied him for a long moment, grief and fury and something almost like mercy warring behind his eyes. "That won't undo what you did," he finally said. "But it will decide what happens next." He didn't raise his weapon again. Instead, he turned away, leaving Sang-hoon standing amid the wreckage of a loyalty he'd broken and, in the same breath, tried to repair, a debt that would follow him long after the smoke cleared, but not a death sentence, not tonight. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance, drawing closer with every second, and the remaining members of the extraction team vanished into the soul night, leaving Serwa's body and the wreckage of 2 years of manipulation behind them. Adiz stood in the ruined dining room, blood on her temple, ash from the burned ledger still drifting faintly in the air around her, and looked up at Min-jun with an exhaustion that went far deeper than the night's violence. "I never lied about wanting justice," she said quietly. "Only about who I thought deserved to pay for it." Min-jun didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who had come to destroy him and instead burned her own case to the ground rather than let a lie win, and something in his expression shifted into territory either of them had a name for yet. "The elders are going to want answers," he said finally. "About the leak. About the fire. About you. And what will you tell them?" Before he could answer, the flashing lights of approaching police vehicles lit up the shattered front windows of the restaurant, and Min-jun's remaining men began moving fast, clearing evidence, pulling Adiz and Min-jun both toward the back exit into the alley beyond. The last thing the camera would have caught, had anyone been filming, was Min-jun's hand closing tightly around Adiz's wrist, not as a captor, not anymore, but as something that hadn't fully decided what to call itself yet, as the two of them disappeared into the night, leaving the question of trust, and everything it would cost them both, unanswered behind them. What began as one impulsive slap in a crowded kitchen unraveled into 2 years of grief, manipulation, and mistaken loyalty on every side of this story. Adiz came to Seoul believing she was chasing justice for her family, only to discover that the people who sent her were the true architects of her uncle's death, using her pain as a weapon against a man who, in the end, turned out to be fighting many of the same enemies she was. Min-jun, for his part, learned that trust built on surveillance and control is no trust at all, and that the woman he'd used as an unwitting asset had a strength and integrity that outmatched every calculation he'd made about her. The real lesson beneath all the twists is this: the people who claim to offer you justice are not always telling you the truth about who deserves to pay for your pain, and sometimes the person you were sent to destroy turns out to understand your grief better than the ones who sent you. Loyalty, once broken, is never simple to rebuild, but it is sometimes still worth trying. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. We truly appreciate every single one of you who stayed with this story from that very first slap to this final moment. Let us know in the comments what part you enjoyed the most, and if you haven't already, please subscribe so you never miss what happens next.